Perfect. Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining in today on another episode of What's Your Angle? And today we have Matt Butterfield with us. And Matt and I have known each other quite a while. And Matt has given me some really excellent advice over the years. Really excited to have him here. At the firm, we're going through goal setting right now. And so it made me think to ask Matt if he would come on board. He knows, I would say Matt's probably the most expert lifestyle designer, if that's a thing, of anyone that I've ever met. So Matt, welcome. If you could introduce yourself, let everybody know how you made your way to Austin, any fun stuff you'd like to talk about before we get into it.
Sure. I've certainly put a lot of effort into lifestyle design. I don't know if I'm the premier expert, but have spent a lot of time on it. Let's see, quick bio. I was raised kind of in California in the Bay Area, but then moved out to Texas in high school and ended up going to the University of Texas. That's what brought me to Austin. And so I've been here about 35 years, something like that. And I split time here in Telluride, Colorado, and started out my career kind of doing the software sales type thing during the tech boom and random transition into home building. And so spent most of my career in the home building industry and have kind of ventured out a little bit from there and try to get my hands in a few different things these days.
That's great. Austin hasn't changed much since you moved here at all.
Right, yeah. I came in 90. I was trying to do the math real quick in my head. I was a little slow on that. But yeah, it is amazing. When I got here, it was right on the tail end of Austin being really crushed by the collapse in oil prices and stuff. And so, yeah, it's a very different city today.
That's great.
Hopefully, we'll continue. I feel like we've done a decent job, all things considered, of holding on to some of the charm of Austin back there and the keep Austin weird vibes. So hopefully we can continue that.
I think we're doing an okay job. I feel like the city's kind of turning into boroughs, really, and so there's
Yeah.
a flavor. Like I know you're downtown right now and spend a lot of time in Deep Eddy. That has a flavor. Northwest Hills is obviously different. Tarrytown has its own flavor. And anyways, I think as Austin continues to grow, as long as we continue just like growing up, we should be good.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's hard to talk about lifestyle design without diving right into business. And you and I were having dinner once, and we talked about the fact that we have a huge leg up as entrepreneurs and business owners to design our lives the way that we want to design them. Would you mind chatting about that a little bit, about your transition from software sales into home building and really what that allowed you to do, why you were attracted to it, and how it all fits in?
Sure. Well, I wish I could say there was a big grand plan with that, but like with a lot of people, I kind of backed into it. The way I ended up doing that transition was back in 2001 when a lot of the technology companies were having pretty serious issues. I was with a startup that essentially ran out of funding. Fortunately, I had been reasonably responsible from a spending perspective and put away a little money, so I was not in dire straits when that happened. But so I was able to take a little time to really think about what I wanted for the next phase of my life. Did I want to continue down that path? Was there something different I wanted to do? And really, more as like a hobby or side project, I considered getting my real estate license, not really to be an agent at the time, but more for kind of trading real estate personally. On the side, I assumed in going in to take those classes that I was going to go back into a different industry, but maintain a real estate license, like in order to do investment properties and flips and things like that. And in that class, I met a builder that had never been on my radar. I'd never even considered what being a builder even would be like and the different types of builders. But I started talking to him, and it was pretty appealing to me. And so by the end of those classes, we had decided to form a company, and I was kind of coming to it with a sales and marketing perspective, and he obviously had the build experience. And so we kind of jumped right into that, and that's how I ended up doing that. The way that evolved was, we started some projects. I was pretty gung ho and put a bunch of deals together, and we did a couple projects together, and we ended things were going well from my perspective, and I think that I don't know whether it was kind of too much too soon for him, but he got a little uncomfortable and we ended up parting ways. I had learned enough to be dangerous, probably not enough where I really felt comfortable going off and doing it by myself, but I didn't have a big choice at that point. And so I kind of jumped in and had learned enough. And really, my first few deals were with friends who trusted me and my integrity more than my knowledge about building. And so I gave them very good deals. They trusted me that I would figure it out. And that's kind of how I got that start. And in hindsight, it ended up being a really perfect fit for my skill set and stuff. But really, that was more by accident than anything else.
I mean, that's how the really good things happen, right?
Sure.
You try something out, it tends to work, and you just keep going with it. That's really amazing. And you jumped into, I mean, pretty high end stuff. I mean, if I remember correctly, some of your early builds were in Barton Creek, a lot of them in Central Austin. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I jumped kind of in the not ultra high end, but especially as compared to what's going on these days in Austin. But yeah, I was definitely went straight into the higher end market in those higher end neighborhoods, and and started off that way.
So as all of this fits into the subject of today, were you interested in designing the business around your life initially? Or, I mean, I know when I first started, and for too many years, all I focused on was just the success of the business. At what point did you really sort of stop and say, "Hey, this is good, but there's a bigger picture"?
Sure. I would say what really went on is doing a business like that kind of as a one-man show. I mean, I wasn't doing the work, but from a general contracting perspective, I was a one-man show and I was getting pulled in a ton of directions. So you're dealing with customers, you're dealing with trades, you're getting calls from trades that they need to get paid today if they're going to show up and do work, and then your customer wants to walk the job, and a supplier needs to talk to you about an order. And so you really get pulled in a ton of directions. You're kind of driving all over the place. It's a very chaotic business if you don't really plan it well. And so while that was going on early on, I was trying to wade through that. I actually read The 4 Hour Work Week,
Oh,
Tim Ferriss. And
nice.
so I was really inspired by that book. And so that book came at the perfect time for me. I read it, I jumped in, full speed ahead with a lot of things in that book, and that's what got me on that path. And so I really started to not really lifestyle design yet, but from a business perspective, really try to automate, simplify, figure out kind of really smart ways to run the business and make myself a lot more efficient. Kind of ahead of the time, certainly for a business that size. I hired a team in India to do a lot of my work at night, like logging into my computer for me, and lots of little things like that, and kind of took the approach that any task that could be automated was a task I was wasting my time on if I wasn't automating it. So I just started plucking those off one at a time, and simplifying things, and creating more order in the business. And so as I did that and kind of got out of the mode of just surviving because I was getting more efficient, having a little bit more time, that's where I really kind of started moving into more of the lifestyle design aspect of that.
So I have to stop on this one for a second because I think it's hugely impactful to so many people that are listening. When did you start strictly email batching? I know that's a really pointed question, but at what point did you say I'm not going to let email run my life anymore?
A similar time frame to that when that book came out, and frankly, I don't know, is that like 2004 maybe? Something like that. Don't hold me to that year, but when I read that book, that was one of the things in there was the email batch processing. And that the other thing that I kind of learned from that, I'll give you another example that's not necessarily applicable to people watching in their exact business, but certainly similar things are. One of the examples was it felt like someone always needed a check, and that if I didn't give it to them, then the house was going to slow down. So it was kind of, if I was doing my job right, I needed to get these guys paid immediately when they needed it. Otherwise, I was slowing the project down. And so that thinking had me running around crazy. I'd be out in the middle of doing something and someone would tell me they need a check, and I'd have to race back to the office, go cut a check, go meet the person, then go off to my next thing. And there was no rhyme or reason to it. These people, I had given them no guidance. And so I was running around on their timelines and on their needs and had the false assumption that I didn't have a choice or that if I asked them to do something differently, then they might not be happy about it or might not be willing to do it. Well, I mean, in hindsight, it's almost silly to say. All I had to do was send a note out to everyone and I just changed the process. I said, hey, if you want to get paid on Friday, I need an invoice on Monday. And if the invoice is valid, you'll have a check on Friday. And there aren't going to be, any other ways to do it. No more emergency checks. So we need you to plan ahead. And, the first week, I don't know, 25% of the people didn't do it. And I had a talk with them. I still went and cut them checks, but I told them, that's your warning. The second week, 10% did it, and I actually didn't give them a check and told them they had to wait till the next week. And remarkably quickly, everyone was fine working around. I didn't even get any complaints. I don't remember a single person complaining about it except when I wouldn't give them the check, that one time. But once the process was going, no one complained, and my life was so easy. I had plenty of time to plan. I cut checks and it was a game changer.
It's interesting. I feel like you see some people try to take that idea and they take it to an unreasonable place, right? Like, oh, I'm only going to pay them once a month or something silly. I think that if you have sort of the litmus, like the gut feeling, is this respectful? Is this reasonable? And if the answer is yes, you're not going to get a whole lot of pushback. And when you do get pushback, it's usually a red flag that maybe you shouldn't work with this person for other reasons. So
That's
that's
a Yeah, that's a great point, and I should add to that. So in the industry, from an industry standard, it is very common because builders are working with banks and having to get draws and then pay trades. So it's not uncommon for, as a general practice, vendors and trades to have to wait a couple weeks for a draw to come in order for them to get paid. So your point is good. And what I was offering them in exchange is, hey, if you make this part easy for me, I'm going to pay you guys every week and you can count on it regardless of whether I'm getting a draw. And so there was a little bit of a carrot and a stick there where they were getting some value if they fell in line. So that's a very good point.
it makes things a lot easier to keep in order as well. When as you juggle more and more things, you can't really rely on memory. So you have to have these,
Certainly.
yeah, you have to have these systems that you can fall back on and say, well, I know certainly we had this check available for you last Friday because we always do, right? You don't have to remember what happened. We could have another podcast just on systems, I think, and I'd love to do that at some point in time. Yeah, and I know. So I'll tell a personal story. Whenever I asked you about this first, I remember it was in 2017. We had lunch, and I wanted to know. I wasn't real happy. I was working a ton, and I wanted to know, how do you ski so much? And that was literally it. I thought that if I could just ski more, that my life would be better. I'd be happier. And you stopped me and you said, hold on, man. Like, I think I'd started the conversation and said, well, if I can just get more leads, I think this is going to work. And you stopped me and you said, hold on, no, we need to take this to a much higher level than that. And you started asking me some pretty pointed questions that I learned after the fact were really all about lifestyle design. And you went straight to life rather than business, because business, like your business system and your business goals, have to fit into life, not the other way around. So when did you have that realization? How did that come about? You're already a systems guy, obviously. You've seen it succeed in your business. Now you're going to apply it to life. What does that look like?
Sure. So I think in getting the more free time in my business, like I said, when I started, and I think that's true of most people out there right now, whether they have their own business or they're working for someone else, life can be pretty demanding. So if you don't have any free time to really consider these things because you're just putting out fires all day, it makes things very difficult. So as I got more efficient and had more free time, and instead of working 60, 70-hour weeks, I was working 30-hour weeks, 25-hour weeks, all of a sudden I had the time to really consider those other things that you're talking about. And that's when I really kind of dug into that. And I think here's where I would start, similar theme to what you just said. People have goals in their business and all of these different things. I ask people all the time when they're talking about this, well, do you have like a life plan? Like everyone, not everyone, lots of people have business plans. Very few people have a life plan. And I guess my first question is kind of, well, what is more important than the life plan? Like at some point, yeah, your business plan needs to fit in the life plan, as you said. So if you don't even have a life plan and you haven't even considered what you want that to look like, it's hard to have a business plan that's going to align. So for instance, if you don't really have the foresight to think about the implications of things, you can end up on a road that you don't realize is not a road you want to avoid. And an example would be if all your focus is, I want to grow my business and I want to have a $50 million business, that's fine. But if that means you're working 60, 80 hours a week, that may not actually be what you want. And so I think and there's nothing wrong with, if that is what you want, that's great. I think everyone wants different things and is comfortable with different workloads and all that. But the first step needs to be like, what do I really want to get out of work? And there are lots of answers to that. And so I think it's really important to understand those things and then build the work into something that fits into that overall plan. And so what is funny is I get the question all the time. Well, first I get almost everyone I know makes jokes like that I don't have a job. And
Great sign, by the way. Does he work?
yeah,
Can't tell.
yeah, I get that all the time. And I do work and I do get value out of my job and it is an important part of my life. But the reason that I get that question all the time is I seem to have plenty of free time and I seem to be able to do what I want when I want. And so that is true while I also have a job. So that's kind of the beauty of that. And I think that people often just don't realize that that's possible. And they don't understand that, I shouldn't say everyone, most people's first response is, well, I don't really have that option. And I would argue that's not really true. You're limiting yourself. You might have to make some sacrifices, but you certainly have that option. I mean, my business that I started out in is not at the top of the list of businesses you would say has lots of freedom and free time. I mean, frankly, the general contractors, most that you would run into, feel like they have no free time and no ability to change the schedule because they have to show up at certain times when emergencies come up on the job or all these different things. So I kind of tell them that's an excuse. If you really want to do it, there are a lot of ways to do it. It might not take a day. You might take a few years to do the transition, but you
Yeah.
can absolutely do it.
I think horizon's really important. One of my favorite quotes is Bill Gates. He says, everyone overestimates what they can accomplish in a year and underestimates what they can accomplish in 10. And if you look
Yes.
at a 10-year time frame, you can accomplish quite a lot. If you look at a 5-year time frame, you can accomplish quite a lot. Agree with you 100% that anyone can do it. So what are your life goals? Do you mind sharing?
No, I actually printed that off in anticipation of you asking, so I didn't like freeze on camera and not remember. But I'll give you kind of a highlight of how I did it. And I don't think this is necessarily the right way. I think you can do it however you want and what's important to you. But the way I did it is I kind of just started with life principles. So, I don't mind sharing this. I'll tell you kind of how I have this. First, I started off on a pretty high level, just on a spiritual aspect. And I just wanted to make sure that I think about my spirituality on a daily basis. Just where do I fit in the grand scheme of the universe type of thing. And that can be different for every person, but it's just a reminder to kind of stay big and at a high level and have that perspective. The other thing I put is spread love to everyone. And I specifically defined it. I'm saying do this by treating everyone like you would treat your own child. And so what I mean by that, and the reason I phrased it that way is, loving everyone doesn't mean you don't hold people accountable or that you do avoid making them angry or things like that. It's really a bigger picture thing. And you can still fire an employee if you care about them. It's just how you go about doing it. And so that was the thing. I want to make sure I'm kind of doing things from that perspective with everyone I encounter. Always be seeking and improving. So again, these are kind of just very high level things. I always want to be learning things and bettering myself. Don't be lazy. It's easy to kind of sit around and not, go into places that aren't comfortable. And so I don't want to do that. Another one that I gave a lot of thought to is live every day like you have 5 years left. And the reason I chose 5 years is if we live every day like this is literally our last day, I'm going to be, I don't know, slamming milkshakes, getting drunk, cavorting with women. I don't know, making unhealthy decisions probably because
Love how you just
there's nothing to plan for. There's only one day left. Why not be a hedonist or something? I don't know. So 5 years though, I felt like was short enough that you have to have like longer term planning and you can't be irresponsible with your time. But if you only have 5 years left, a lot of your bucket list items and things that you want to do are gonna take, position front and center. And so for me, I thought that window of 5 years was kind of a good way to do it. And you can't assume you're gonna be around till you're 80. And so that's why that's in there. Then my next section is what am I seeking? So what I'm seeking is strong, fun, deep relationships. At the end of the day, I like to use the thing, if I were the richest man in the world and I went on a vacation to the fanciest hotel in the world and had everyone serving me, would that be more fun than if I had my best buddies from college in a crappy hotel, doing nothing? That would be way more fun. So the relationships are way more important than those other things. And so it's important not to forget that or get so focused on a goal that you kind of lose perspective on that stuff. I had in here that I'm seeking experiences, again, more than material possessions. I think it's clear from the science and personal experience that sure, there's nothing wrong with material possessions, but going out and buying your dream car is really exciting for the first week you have your dream car. And, you can get enjoyment out of that, but you're going to get a lot more enjoyment out of experiences. I'd rather be spending money on those kind of things that are memories for lifetimes. So that's in there. Make a difference in others' lives. It's another thing that, science is behind it too. When you're helping other people and impacting other people, you just feel better about yourself. And so I want to make sure I don't forget about that. Creative business life, which goes down to what we're talking about. I mean, for me, business is fun when you're thinking through creative solutions and you're not stuck in a box and you're able to figure out ways to accomplish different things in different ways. So I want to focus on that. Be less serious. We may get to this. I have in here regain the love of life that I had before my wife passed away. I went through a little bit of a phase after that where, I kind of lost that. And so I want to make sure I'm always I feel like I have that back, but I want to make sure I keep that back. So then the last section was how do I do that? So this is what I'm seeking. These are my principles I want to work off of, but how do I do it? Focus on kind of abundance and trust in kind of the universe. I think our thoughts really do kind of define us. If you're focused on kind of gratitude and the things coming your way and encouraging more of that, I think you're going to be more successful than doing the opposite. Make plans every week. So instead of just sitting there waiting for life to happen to you, like actively figure out what do I want to do this week? And instead of having 3 hours in front of the TV,
yeah.
what do I want to plan for the week and do some other exciting things? Plan adventures regardless of others' participation. This is an important one for me. Everyone's busy. And so it's very easy to have ideas like, well, I'd love to go, using your example, on a ski trip. Well, I kind of found, and I think this is true for everyone, it's hard to really get that all put together. It's not impossible, but when you're trying to get friends together to go do stuff, I don't know, 20% of the time it actually ends up happening because people are busy and things. So what I decided to do is I'm just going to go do it. And I'm going to invite people to join me. But if they're not coming, I'm going. And I found that to be very successful because then it just forces a decision point for people. And then I'm going anyway. And so that's worked very well. And so I continue to do that. And most of the time I have people now coming along for the ride. But I also find being by yourself on something like that is very rewarding as well. So I don't have any fear around doing that on my own. Treat every encounter as a way to add value to someone's life. I mean, that just is a fun way to live life. You go to the grocery store and check out. You can kind of do it in a very efficient way, or you can ask the person how their day is. I just find it brings more joy. And also, I'm shocked at how often it kind of snaps someone out of maybe they're having a day that sucks, and someone just taking an interest in them brightens their day a little bit. So I think that's important. Plan times with families, friends, and employees. And it's really just about being deliberate. I'll kind of rush through this because I feel like I'm dragging on this one, but a few more important ones. My health goals. Instead of just be healthy,
Yeah.
my goal is really specific, and it's remain healthy and fit, prepared for last minute adventures. So I want to be in a state where any of my friends could ask me to do just about anything within reason, and I can actually say yes. I want to be in a position to say yes. If I'm way out of shape and you, for instance, are into biking and we're like, I have this amazing opportunity in 3 weeks that we could go do this. Well, if I'm not reasonably fit, it's going to have to be a no. If I'm reasonably fit, I can say yes to that and figure it out. So that's important to me. Travel, again, these are perspective things, thinking outside the box, automating, simplifying your life, and kind of the 80/20 rule. So that rounds it out. But that's now anytime I'm making decisions about life or what I'm doing, I kind of have a guideline to be like, is that helping me move more towards these things or is it pulling me away?
That's amazing. How often do you revisit that and iterate it?
I would say quarterly. And I actually don't have that calendarized, but I think about it enough that I know when I kind of need to do it.
Yeah.
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 But I
No,
think it's good.
I had so I after we met years ago, I sat down and wrote one, and then I hadn't revisited it in 7 years, and I did very recently. But I'm gonna steal more of yours because I need to add some more. I need to add some more in there. Yeah, thank you. That's amazing. So moving to business, I know a lot of people here want a lot of the same things. I hear you loud and clear that it's an incredibly important first step to document what you want out of life. And I'd encourage everyone to follow your advice because it works. It works really, really well. After you have this down, what do you do? What do you do with business? How do you start planning your business in a way that allows you to meet these more important life goals?
Sure. Well, I think one important caveat is there's nothing wrong with when you're starting a business or in a new job to be putting more time into it than you're going to want to do sustainably for the long term. So it's not like you're going to start day one, I want to work 20 hours a week and I'm going to start my business working 20 hours a week. That's not always a very feasible thing. But I think it's important to understand what the long term goals are. And as you think about that, different jobs require different levels of engagement and different levels of that. And so some people really enjoy and don't have a lot of outside hobbies and love putting lots of time and energy into their work, and it's their core driver of self-value. And I don't judge any of that good or bad. And if that's truly the case for you and you're at your happiest working 60 hours a week, that's just fine. But I think that in after you kind of figure out what you want long term and what your sustainable level of that really is, then you can kind of work backwards to figure out your long-term plans of how exactly you're going to get there. So in my case, I read the 4 Hour Work Week. My goal was not to literally work 4 hours, and I don't think that's the point of the book. But it did have me think about it, and I have a lot of outside interest. I have a family. I have, different things that I want to do. And my business life is one of the things I like to do. It's not the thing I like to do. So I was aiming for more like 15, 20 hours a week. And so that was kind of my goal. And if you're going to do that, it's important to kind of figure out, well, I'm not going to go be a lawyer and join a law firm where all the partners are expected to do 60 hours a week. That's probably not a great fit for me if I want my life plan to be 20 or 24 hours. It doesn't mean you can't be a lawyer. It just means you need to go a different route. The other thing is you need to think outside the box. And I think a lot of problems that people have are there's kind of this general expectation with what a job looks like. And if you're not willing to challenge those norms or question those things, then you kind of get sucked in to kind of what all of the sheep are doing. And again, I don't mean to say that in some real judgmental way. I just think that a lot of people just kind of follow what they think they're supposed to do. And they think they're supposed to get a job and they think they're going to supposed to work 40 or 50 hours a week and they think all of these things and they don't question any of that. And so I think it's important to not be afraid to be a contrarian. And also you have to make some sacrifices there too. It is possible to make the same amount of money working 20 or 25 hours a week that you may work 40 or 45 hours a week, but that's certainly not a quick thing, and you may need to change your priorities in how you do that. And again, that's questioning norms and questioning the way society's doing it, which is kind of, I don't know if you want to get off on this tangent, it's kind of a bigger picture issue. What I've been noticing, I just had this conversation with someone the other day and kind of did a deep dive on it. I found it interesting. I think historically, like over thousands of years, humans, we kind of developed to follow the herd a little bit. And I think that was for good reason. Back in earlier days where you're really struggling for survival to find food and safety and shelter and all of those different things, learning from your elders, like how to do things and what you should be doing and what you should be focused on is very important. And cooperating with other people, very important just for sheer survival. What we've slowly transitioned to, and I think, starting in the 60s with intense marketing becoming a real industry, and now even more with AI and social media, what we're being herded into now is not always in our best interest. Whereas before, historically, I think for the most part it was. And now we have powerful computers trying to manipulate us into doing things. And it's not even necessarily that it's all nefarious, but all they care about is selling their product, regardless of whether that's actually good for you or not. And
Right.
so now we have to kind of go against our basic instincts to do all of these things that are being marketed to us. And I think that's why people are as unhappy as they've ever been, because they're being sold this life that's not satisfying them. And so I think it's important to take a step back and be like, just because everyone else is doing it doesn't make it good for me or right.
I mean, I agree with you. I think skepticism is an incredibly important quality as long as you can maintain positivity while you're being skeptical. I'd love to go maybe on a lift soon. We can talk about the dopamine reward system and how the technology really has just taken advantage of that in order to
Sure.
make money. But yeah, loud and clear, questioning things, questioning just because everyone else is doing this, does that mean that it's right for me? I think it's an incredibly important.
So back to the business question, I just wanted to kind of frame it that way as you go back to answering the business and how to do that.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of techniques, and if you have that big level focus of your goals and making sure you kind of have an idea of how you're going to accomplish that, then you start to figure out. I think the automation piece is really important, and the 80/20 rule stuff's really important. And to give some examples, you were talking about Bill Gates' quote. When you go back to that, it sounds daunting to try to automate all these different things in your business. There are probably hundreds of them that you could actually do. And so the way I look at that is, if I can spend 4 hours saving 10 minutes a day for the rest of my career, that is
100%.
well worth the time. And if I have 100 of those, the number of hours, that sounds very daunting and very difficult. But if you break it down one at a time, like you're talking about, and you're like, once a week, I'm going to pick something that I'm going to invest a couple hours in to save me 5 minutes a day, or I'm going to spend 2 days saving me something that costs me 3 hours a week to do. And you look up after a year and you have 50 items on your list that you all of a sudden made way more efficient. That adds up tremendously. And it's kind of these bite-sized things. The other thing is having the discipline to do kind of the 80/20 rule. And it applies to so many different things. Some of the obvious examples are customers, especially when we're starting businesses or starting our career. We want every single customer. And what anyone who's been in business a really long time realizes is that is not the right approach, because taking on a terrible customer costs you so much time and energy. It is just not worth it. And you really need the discipline to be able to take the risk and turn people away.
Yes.
and have the faith that long term that is going to benefit you, even if you feel like I really need that money today.
So it's interesting. It's not obvious on its face, but every time you have a bad customer, you should go double down on lead gen. You should figure out how you can get more customers so that you can more easily say no to the bad customers.
Yeah,
That's my perspective on it. Another point I'd like to make, and it's borrowed from you. I love your term brain damage, and most people don't put brain damage into the equation. Can you talk about that for a second?
sure. Well, I think it applies a lot of different ways. Some are just a bad customer kind of bringing the mojo and the vibe down. Like that's kind of a one everyone can appreciate. It's kind of like hanging out with what I like to call an energy sucker. You
Yeah.
know, there are people out there that you walk away from talking to them and it's just a downer, and it's not fun. It feels like work. And then you have other people out there that you feel energized after you meet them and hang out with them. And so from a sheer personality standpoint, I'm going to surround myself, not just employees, but also customers, with people who I feel more energized after I hang out with, not less. So that's one example. Another one is kind of just a brain damage from like a brain suck. And I'll give you an example that applies to me, but I think you guys can figure it out in your own business. If I had 5 really large builds, so I had 5 things to track and 5 customers, the effect on my brain in keeping all of those things straight versus having 20 smaller jobs, the same amount of, say, business overall, or even hours in my day, revenue in the door, the difference between trying to have 20 things in my brain and 5 is substantial. So even though I'm spending the same amount of time working on those 2 things, the ability to do a good job and the scatterbrain effect is drastically different. And so that's another important factor to think about when you're doing things, I think.
Yeah, so you just talked about turning away customers, the people that cause brain damage, but it's also business owners want to take when you're early, you want to take every deal. And
Yeah.
it's really important for real estate agents, for example, to say, no, sorry, I don't do that. You have a great client who maybe wants you to help their daughter find an apartment near UT or something like that. Send them to somebody better. Somebody who's better at that job, who has more availability. And I think, I don't think I've seen, I've watched you turn away really high end renovation projects. And I think that's how that manifests in your business by saying, no, sorry, I just don't do that. You have fewer things to juggle. So saying
That's
no. Yeah, go ahead.
That's right. And I have sympathy for people, and I've been there where you might not be able to say no at some point. And that's okay. So I'll give you an example. Let's just use your example of a real estate agent. You're starting out and you have someone who wants to buy a house and they're very unpleasant to deal with, but you don't have any other customers and you don't have money for rent. Like, I'm not suggesting that you don't take that job. But what I'm suggesting is you make changes in your life so that that is a temporary thing. And that could mean I spend less money, you know, I find a different place to live so that I'm not relying on that and I have the ability to start a little bit slower, or I've got to gut it out for 3 months to get a little revenue that I can save up so that then I can make these decisions. But the point is, you need to be really deliberate about that. And same with the spending time on work. There's nothing wrong with starting a job and working 80 hours a week because you've got to get it built, as long as you're very deliberate and understand that this is not sustainable. I'm committing to do this for a quarter or for 6 months or whatever it is, but I absolutely need to transition another way. So that is kind of the point. You need to get to the point where you can say no and do that. I've taken a more extreme version of that as of late. So I've kind of transitioned. I started spending more time in Telluride and less time in Austin. So now I'm kind of splitting time evenly. So my previous model was not going to work as well. I could kind of see the writing on the wall because I was not able to spend as much time here. Secondly, I personally felt that post COVID, the average customer in the building space was more of a pain in the ass.
Well, the prices went through the roof, so a lot comes with that, right?
Not only that, you had challenges. I think people were more stressed out in their own lives. I think you had challenges in supply chain. There were a lot of reasons for it, but the point was the best customers were still good customers. The good customers were decent customers. The okay customers were kind of bad. The bad were terrible. But the overall average went down and it was less rewarding for me. And because I've been doing this a long time and I'm at a later phase and back on the life principles thing, I was willing to trade my income or some of my income for some other things from a life satisfaction standpoint. And I had saved some money and have the ability to do that. And so now I shifted and simplified my business. I picked my best construction manager and partnered with him and took a bigger organization down to the two of us. Instead of doing lots of projects in a big team, we're doing 5 projects a year. Instead of doing it for customers, I do it only for friends or speculatively because for me personally, I enjoy and I'm not stressed out by the challenges of building. Things going wrong, the city, dealing with that. That doesn't bother me. What bothered me more were doing that and having customers upset about things that I couldn't control. And then, especially if you have a customer that either does not understand or is trying to micromanage something they don't understand. And it just became a point where it wasn't worth it for me. So I switched and am doing that. And that's another thing I think is important. Like, it's not always about building your business or making more money. It's about how that fits in. And that's going to be different over the lifespan of your business. So
So
that's important.
yeah, you said something earlier, and it wasn't written in your life goal because I think it's probably your top line business goal, other than maybe only doing fun and interesting things. And that's that you have to make only as much money as you need, uh, that will then allow you the time to spend the money, right? And money becomes a point on the board. Otherwise, a lot of respect for you for saying, "Hey, look, this bigger organization, it's just no longer suiting my current life goals, and it's time to make a change." I think a lot of people with that successful business wouldn't be able to say, "Hey, we're moving into another season of life now, and now my business needs to change a little bit." Tell me a little bit about your perspective on seasons of life and what that means to you, how your own life goals will change, how your business goals will change around that. Around.
Yeah, that's a good question. And kind of building on what you just said, what I like to ask people, because I do get the question a lot where people are like, I don't understand how this is working. It seems like, how can I live this way? And I often do start with that question you're talking about, which is, okay, well, why are you working? To make money. Okay, well, why are you making money? Well, to have this or that. Okay, well, how much of that do you need? And you start asking, and people haven't even thought about that, right? They really, they just, money is good, more money is better, and they don't really think about the details. And I've seen some extreme cases where it makes you see the fallacy in that. I can think of 2 examples. Both of these were very wealthy individuals. And, one was a billionaire, right? So, I mean, you can do whatever you want. I mean, within reason, I'm not talking about illegal.
He just tried to stretch that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Great point. Let's leave morals out of it. But from a like, you have the freedom to do within the laws to do pretty much whatever you want. There's not an excuse I have to work. Like at the end of the day, if you have $1 billion, you certainly can provide for all the needs that you have. And I watched this individual and I've often said what does rich mean? Rich to me means I have the freedom to do what I want when I want. That is the goal for me. That's rich for me. And while I had far, 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 far less money than this billionaire, I was a lot richer than this guy. And so I was building a house with him. And when you build a house with someone, you learn a lot about them. It's a long process, it's emotional, and you can't hide your personality over that time frame with those kinds of things. And so I watched this guy, and it was not a life I would want. He was pulled in so many directions. He was constantly tied to his phone, constantly addressing issues, constantly having to make decisions. Everyone wanted something from him. And it was just a perfect example where that is not the solution. That's not something I want. And then, I had another guy who he had a very good work ethic. And I think the habit of working, and he had been raised that way, how important that was. And he was 75 years old, had lots and lots of money and canceled every vacation he had planned. And it's like, well, why? Like, you don't have to do that. And he had built into his brain that that's just he had to do it. An important work thing would come up, so he had to do it. And I just found it to be sad. And so yeah, I think it's important to really consider this. So then during your life, those things change. So in the beginning, when you're fresh in your career, you really do need to build up a base. And so you don't have most people, this stuff takes time. And so in most cases, you need to work hard and build up some resources and build up some experience to in order to then be able to have a little more flexibility in how you do some of those things. Earlier, you don't have a family and you're trying to get things going. That's obviously a more aggressive work time frame for most people, and it should be. As you move into a place where you're having children, and if you're in the place where you have the resources to provide for your family, and that's a subjective thing. I don't mean the resources to provide what Instagram says you should be providing for your family, but for what is actually good for your family and necessary, which is really a loving environment, shelter, food, and those kinds of things. Then you may want to spend a little more time with your child because you're not going to have another opportunity to do that. And so it's important to think about that. Is this the time I want to be working 80 hours a week when I have an 8-year-old kid who wants to see me? And so that's an important time frame. I'm now an empty nester. I just had my daughter graduate from high school. So now I suddenly have a lot more freedom to pursue other interests. So that's another change where I'm in the middle of figuring that out. I may want to pursue some more just straight up philanthropic type activities. I may want to do another business that has an impact on the world. I may want to tweak what I'm doing in my business. It's wonderful to have those options. But yeah, every one of those phases changes both the time, the amount of money you need to make, and how you want to use your resources. So I think it's important that that be a moving target.
Mayor Telluride, is that the next thing?
I have watched that, and that is funny. I do not think I want that job.
Right.
I do love it up there, and I do love the community up there, though.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice. So this is all amazing, and I want to get to maybe some fun stuff.
yeah.
Tell me about some of your adventure goals. You're one of the most adventurous guys I know. What have you done? You were telling me about Mount. Tell me about Mount Rainier. How did that come about? And is there anything on par with that you haven't shared with me? You do a lot of adventurous stuff.
Sure. I like just doing different stuff. So I would say that I am kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, both in business, which can be very helpful. I think being a generalist as opposed to a specialist in business can actually be, especially in this day and age, a really valuable thing. I would also say that's true with my hobbies. So I love to do lots of different things. I'm decent at lots of different things, but I don't like to focus on one in particular. So yeah, back to answer your question, I think I had kind of a specific mountain climbing phase. I had a friend who was into that and invited me to do a couple things. And so that became just an interesting one to do on the list. And I do like a lot of my adventure things kind of serve two purposes. One, I generally like the challenge. I like to kind of set a goal. It serves a few different purposes. Setting a physical goal gives me a reason to work out and be healthy. It's just an extra motivation as opposed to just making myself get up just for the heck of it to do it. So I like that. Secondly, when these things are outside, I think you have a much different perspective when you can step away from busy life and be in the outdoors. I just think it really changes how you look at things and makes you realize, I don't know, things aren't as important, these little details in your life. And frankly, you're not as important. And you should just kind of look at the big picture. And I think that's really helpful. So those things integrate. And getting to a new place in a different spot is also perspective shifting. So I kind of like to do things and I like the adrenaline thing. Not in a, I have a daughter, so I don't,
No,
I'm not into,
you're not a
not
skeptic
crazy.
adrenaline junkie. Yeah, no.
But I
You
do like the adrenaline, an aspect of that for sure. Yeah.
So I was talking with Ali about this because Beck has he loves the adrenaline, right?
Yeah,
And he wants to do paragliding. We saw them in
sure.
France, and Ali said no, not through fear. She said he needs to learn that he's got to earn it, that he needs to. So the earn your turns idea, but obviously we're not afraid to get on a ski lift. I think there's something about having that feeling after you've done something that's physically exerting, and you really feel like you've accomplished something. It's huge. It's absolutely huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And even on the adrenaline thing, I think it's important to, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just important to really be deliberate again. And so if you have a child and you're concerned about it, you can do some things. Just put in the time to really make sure you understand what the risks are and that they're mitigated to a degree that you're comfortable with. And instead of going in blindly. And I think there are a lot of things that maybe from an outside perspective seem really risky, but if the person's really put the time and energy into that, it's not as risky. But to go back to your question, the one I have on my list right now that I've been wanting to do for a couple of years and the weather didn't provide, and then I had a scheduling conflict is I want to do the Haute route, which is, for those of you who don't know what ski touring is, that's where you have skins for the bottom of your skis. So what you can do is these skins are kind of like shark skins. So you can actually hike up a mountain, uphill on these skis and they grab. And so you climb the mountain. When you get to the top, you take the skins off, and then it's like doing downhill skiing. And the benefit to that is that, well, number one, you can get a nice workout going up there, but secondarily, you're not getting off a lift where there are hundreds of people a day skiing the same stuff. So you're skiing kind of fresh tracks and fresh powder. And I love the adventure of that. And so the Haute route is from Chamonix to Zermatt. So Chamonix, France to Zermatt, Switzerland, and you stay in mountain huts. And so I'm going to do that with a friend of mine, and that's the kind of thing that is exciting. We're using a guide. There's the risk mitigation part. There's still some risks, but it is relatively safe. But it's a really exciting adventure, a good workout, see the world, meet some people, and so that's my latest one. I'm going to do that in March.
Pretty nice backdrop and pretty nice food too. Doesn't hurt, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty gorgeous stuff. But like, I mean, all those things, like whether it's running with the bulls or like, it doesn't matter. I just think it's fun to experience life and check out different things. So I do all sorts of things like that when I can. I try to make sure that I'm actively planning those sorts of things.
So the question I usually have when we're wrapping up the podcast, it doesn't really apply here. I think you're already there. The question I usually ask is, okay, business is handled and you get to do whatever you want to. What's next? And I think that you're trying to figure out sort of not necessarily what's next. So I'm trying to come up with a better question than that. After the Zermatt trip, what's next on your adventure goals? Have you started conceptualizing that?
Not necessarily, but I would like to answer that question a slightly different way. And I think I did borrow this from Tim Ferriss also, if I remember correctly, which by the way, I ran into him in Telluride, which was kind of fun.
Oh wow, he lives in East Austin or did for a while.
No, I know. Yeah, he
Yeah.
moved to Austin and then I saw him in Telluride and I always wanted to just run into him. I'm not someone who typically, if I see some, I don't know, Taylor Swift on the side of the road, I'm not typically someone who wants to go up and try to get an autograph or something, but he really did have such an impact. I just wanted to share with him that it made a massive difference in all the different things I'm doing. So that was kind of fun to run into him, and he was very gracious. It was nice. But to answer your question, the way I look at this, and I love this concept, is basically this is another one of those. If you look at how you're supposed to do it or how most people do it, it's I get a job, I work hard on my job, I retire, and then I go do the fun things I want to do when I retire. And there's a lot of problems with that. I mean, number one, you might not make it to retirement, you might get hit by a truck. So that's one thing. Number two, when most people are retiring, their list of things they are capable of doing is much smaller. And even if you're taking really good care of yourself, some athletic pursuits you want to do that you could do at 25, you're not very well equipped to do at 65. And so I think that whole model is broken. And it's kind of, I mean, I don't know, diverting a little here, but I'll use the example. When you're really busy and you're like, all I want to do is sit and do nothing for 4 days, most people, once they have the sit down, do nothing, they do it for 4 hours and then they're actually ready to do something. So I think it's the same with kind of these lifestyle life seasons. It's like I want it to be sustainable throughout every year. So what I want to do is not have work my butt off, then retire at 65. I want my life to feel like the balance of retirement and working and fun is there every month of my year or every quarter of my year. So it's not like I need to go on vacation every week, but at the same time, I want to be working, getting value, having fun every week in what I'm doing, taking a vacation every couple of months, and feeling like I'm doing these mini retirements every 4 times a year as opposed to once in my life. So I think that is more how I look at it to answer your question. As far as answering what's after from the adventure perspective, I would say, again, I just mentioned I'm more of an empty nester. So I'm kind of reevaluating everything. I do think I'm going to be in more of a position to have a little more of an impact on the world.
Yeah.
Before I was spending a lot of time as a single father, so I wasn't having to spend as much time on business, but in having a well-rounded life, I spent a big portion of my time being a single dad raising my daughter. And now that's a big chunk that has been removed. And so I would like to find a way, probably, when I say philanthropic, I don't just really mean from a money perspective. I mean from just doing good in the world. That can be a for-profit thing, that can be a nonprofit thing, it can be casually helping people around the community. That's kind of one of the things I'm focused on. The adventure things I feel like come all the time. Frankly, you throw them out to me all the time, so I'm not worried about getting one of those on the on the books.
Nice. Well, I'm excited to see what you come up with for philanthropy. We've chatted very briefly about that in the past. You always have some really excellent ideas. Want to open it up. We have, it looks like 35 people still on the call. If anyone has any questions for Matt right now, I'd love to chat about them. If not, no problem at all.
And you may need to read if one comes up. I'm not sure on the screen where it pops up.
Up right here, yeah. Well, Matt, it looks like you nailed it as always.
Or everyone was so boring they don't want me to talk anymore.
Not
So
at all. Not
yeah,
at
that
all.
could be it too.
No, this is phenomenal. I can't thank you enough. Like, I mean, for everything you've helped me with over the years, and where you are now. I know we didn't talk about what you went through with Christy, but obviously very sad. But to see where you are now and how happy your life is and how happy everything is, man, I'm very, very, very happy for you. I'm very grateful to call you a friend. So thank you for coming today.
Well, thank you. I'll leave it with one last thing since you brought that up on Christy. I just want people out there to remember there's always an excuse that you can't do this. And you really can't. You might not be able to do it day one, but absolutely you can do it. And so that mindset of coming up with reasons you can't, it doesn't really hold water. And anyone who wants to reach out to me, I can talk to them about challenges in my life that I've had to overcome to still be able to do that. But you can do it too. So Eric has my contact information, so I'm happy to talk to anyone.
Love to pass along to anybody. Thanks again.
All
Thank
right,
you.
take care.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
to everybody who came.